I'm right on the edge of Pacific Spirit Park. There's a lot of construction noise going on right behind me here, so hopefully you're not getting too much of that. But I wanted to show you this. This is a really good example for playing ecological detective. There's kind of an interesting thing going on here, and I wonder if you can figure out what it is. So first, maybe just pause the video, take about 30 seconds to just look at this scene here, and don't speculate about what has happened. First, just take a minute to describe what you see. Tell me what you observe. Go ahead and pause the video, take 30 seconds to write those things down. Okay, so when I look at this, the first thing that stands out to me is there's a massive Douglas fir, but it's buttressed. It's up above the soil, so that's pretty strange. I can see its roots are very exposed. It looks relatively stable. It's a massive tree. Its roots have been able to grow in over time. I also see, it might be a little harder to see in your view, there's also a western red cedar doing essentially the same thing right next to it. And actually there's a third western red cedar growing up right here. So that's kind of a funny position for these trees to be growing up on. The other thing that I notice is that there's a bunch of soil here. There's a bunch of exposed soil that's kind of piled up high above the ground, so that's a little bit odd. We've got basically a mound of soil. And then the thing that might be trickiest to notice from where you are, but is really important, there is a very decayed, rotting log running right along here. And if I look back here, there's actually a little bit of bark on it near the base, and it's a Douglas fir bark. I see some fire scars on some of it. So I know this tree has been here for a very long time because the last big fire here was about 100 years ago. So those are the things that I observe. So that's the first step of ecological detective. The next thing I'd like you to do is tell the story of what happened here. Can you figure out what events happened in the past that resulted in this very odd arrangement of soil and trees? All right, pause the video, take a minute or two, and see if you can write down what you think has happened here. Okay, so the key thing here is this rotten log fallen on the ground. That's not the first thing that I noticed when I was looking at this. The first thing that I noticed was just that this tree was really perched. And often that happens when a tree grows in a nurse log and that nurse log has eroded away. But Douglas fir doesn't very often grow in nurse logs, so that would be a little bit out of place. And the soil is so piled up here. So that soil made me think, oh, I bet this was a tip-up mound. A tip-up mound is when a large tree gets blown down and its roots lift out of the ground and pick up all of the soil that's attached to them. And then over time, as that tree rots, that soil kind of drops in place. And so you end up with a pit where the tree was in the ground and then a mound where all that soil got deposited. This is a really classic sign of disturbance that you'll see in forests. And often, if it's happened many hundreds of years ago, when you're walking through the forest, you'll just see a little bit of a depression and a little bit of a mound right next to it. And you'll know that at some point in history, a tree fell there, and that depression is where the tree's roots were that lifted up. And then when that tree rotted away, it deposited that soil on the side in a mound. So when I saw that this was soil, I thought, oh, that looks like a tip up. And that was actually the point when I looked down and said, oh yeah, I see a rotten log here. So what happened, probably 100 years ago, maybe even longer than that, this tree, this big Douglas fir, fell. And when it fell, it lifted up the soil. If I peek behind here, yep, there's definitely a bit of a depression on the other side of this tree that you can't see from your angle. It picked it up and then it deposited this soil here. And Douglas fir germinates really well in exposed mineral soil. So we had that exposed mineral soil, that tree started germinating there. That cedar did the same. And then over time, that soil and that log has eroded away. But both of these trees were able to win that race in that they grew their root structure strong enough that they were able to stay upright even after that soil had eroded. I just moved down the trail about 20 meters and there's another really great example of a tip-up. So you can see I'm standing in the depression that was created when the soil was mounded, and right next to me here is the tip-up mound. We've got a western hemlock growing in top of it. Western hemlocks will also can do really well growing in organic material, but they can also grow on mineral soil. And this tip-up's been here for a really long time. I don't see any sign of the original tree. There's a trail right here, so it's possible that it was moved or disturbed when the trail was created. But another hint that I have that it's been here for a very long time, it's a little hard to see from your angle, but there's a very old rotted snag right behind this hemlock, and it has fire scars on it, and I can tell it's quite old. There's a little bit of bark here. It's an old Douglas fir. So I know that there was a mature tree already growing in this tip-up mound at least 100 years ago when the fires happened. So it's likely that this tip-up mound has been here for at least a few hundred years. Lastly, I'll show you a tip-up that's a little bit earlier in the progression. So this one's still relatively old, but you can see I'm standing in the depression here. The surface level is probably about 50 or 60 centimeters above where I'm standing. So I'm in the depression. And here is the mound. So you can see we still have a little bit of the rotting root structure of the original tree. A lot of the soil has sloughed off and is kind of making the mound here. We do have a western hemlock growing here. That tree looks pretty good right now, but I suspect its long-term prospects are relatively poor. One kind of important thing that I didn't mention earlier about these tip-ups is they're important for habitat, because we've now created a little depression here. And so in the wet time of year, water is going to pool in here because this is a low area and it's going to concentrate. And we can form these little temporary water patches, these temporary wet depressions that can be used for animals like frogs that need to lay their eggs after they breed, or other animals that just need a source of water to drink. So this little microtopography can play an important part in the ecosystem.